Testing.
Front. Next.
Testing. 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 There we go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the now back to annual Broadway Brookhaven Fair. So the soldiers and civilians who've just marched up are members of the 3rd New York Regiment.
Order, y'all.
I'll tell you just a few things about the 3rd New York. My goal today is to kind of share with you a little bit about, how they were uniformed, what the 3rd New York was, how soldiers fought during the Revolutionary War, and so on. After this fashion show, or this explanation of the people of the 3rd New York, around 2 o'clock or so, we're going to do a demonstration of the firing of muskets, followed by firing of a field piece, a 1-pounder gun. Oh, the other way around. Okay, the gun will go first, and then the muskets. So, first, actually, I'm going to start with the ladies first, because I know they're busy. So, during the 18th century, Long Island became occupied by the British after 1776. And at that point, many of the Long Islanders who were patriots had to either sign an oath of allegiance or they had to leave the island. So many of them became refugees. And it was not uncommon for women and children to follow their husbands with the camp, and they were called camp followers. So we have our 2 ladies who are dressed as civilian ladies of the mid-1770s. Christina is barefoot because her shoes wore out, but she's got very sturdy feet, so she can handle that. But both ladies, actually ladies, both step up. I'll explain both at the same time. So women of the 18th century, these women are dressed as working class women. Class was a very, very big distinction in the 18th century. And you had your working class or your poor class, middle class, who were merchants and lawyers and things of that nature, and then you had your upper class, particularly in Britain, who were the gentry, were the noblemen and so on. In America, we didn't have noblemen, but we had wealthy planters like George Washington and wealthy citizens and so on. And many of them were designated by their clothing. While the styles were very similar, the fabric and the cloth was very different. So we're starting out, things that you cannot see. The first thing a woman would wear would be called her shift. The French called it chemise. It is a linen garment that goes from their shoulders down to their below their knees, and the undergarment is made out of linen. Following this, they would put on stays. Stays were a boned corset. So you would never usually see that because it's an undergarment. Christina is showing parts of it to you, so she's being very risque. Followed by 1, 2, or 3 petticoats. Today, because it's the fall season, it's not very cold yet. They only have 1 petticoat, I believe. Petticoat is a very simple garment. It is gathered around the waist. I believe it's tied, isn't it tied?
It is tied.
It is tied. There are no belts. Women didn't wear belts and so on. So you put on your petticoats. If you had them, you would have stockings and maybe buckle shoes. So we have buckle shoes in that case, just very similar to men's shoes. There were women's style shoes with a heel as well, but since these are working class people, they have very functional shoes. And then both ladies are they both short gowns, ladies? So they wear a short gown. A long gown, or regular gown, would be basically almost as long as the petticoat. But the gown is the upper garment that they wear. And you'll notice something, there are no buttons. So women's garments were fastened with pins or with laces, or they were sewn closed. So buttons were not fashionable for ladies, and that'd be a very distinction with the men. Both ladies, I believe, have aprons because they're working at the open fire. They're working women. Even upper class ladies would have aprons, but their aprons would be embroidered and very pretty, and they really were just for show. The ladies also have something you cannot see, and is their pockets. So the petticoat has a slit on each side, and inside, I forgot to mention, after they put on their petticoat, they would put on their pockets. Pockets are tied around the waist, and they are little bags with a slit in them, and they would keep their personal items in their pockets. So you've heard the expression, Lucy Lockett lost her pocket. That's how you could lose a pocket, because it becomes untied and it could fall and they could lose it. Sometimes these pockets were very ornate and highly decorated and embroidered, even though only the woman who owns it would actually see it. Both women have head covering. So in the 18th century, women did not go out, and even men as well, bareheaded. Oftentimes women would wear some sort of a cap made out of linen, and then they would wear maybe a hat on top of it. One of the fashions for women of the period was to have to cover your skin and keep very white skin. So tans were symbol of working class. So high class ladies would often powder their skin with lead-based powder that, at least in some cases, actually poisoned them. They had untimely deaths from that. But working class people, would just try to cover themselves as best they could. Is there anything else that I missed, ladies? I'm looking from the back. Okay, well, looks great. Anyone have any questions for the ladies? Okay, we're gonna do the 3rd New York Regiment sort of en masse, with the exception of the gentleman in the blue coat, who is also 3rd New York, but from a different time period. So as far as we know, first of all, the 3rd New York was authorized in May of 1775 with the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd New York regiments and an artillery company by the New York Provincial Congress. 1775 was a year before the Declaration of Independence. So after hostilities broke out in Boston in April of 75, the Provincial Congress, which was a completely illegal Congress in terms of the British royal government was concerned, met. These are representatives from different communities from all around New York colony, the province of New York. That's why it's called the Provincial Congress. We were not a state yet. Authorized the raising of these regiments. The 1st New York Regiment got blue coats faced in red, just very much like the soldier that you see here. It's called regimental coats. The 2nd New York got blue faced red, and the story goes that they ran out of blue cloth, so the authorization was for gray coats faced in green. So we do have some documentary evidence that some soldiers in the 3rd New York had gray coats, and that's what we see here, gray faced in green. A regimental coat was a very typical European style. The style was for a coat that was based on a civilian style, except that it was double-breasted, so it has lapels and a collar and cuffs that are a contrasting color. And in the European armies, the British Army, and other European armies, that contrasting color denoted what your regimental color. So the Americans followed British traditions, and they had similar style coats. Yeah, you can step up. That's good. The coats are made out of worsted wool, woven, and dyed the color that they are. And most of the soldiers in the gray coats have short coats. They're cut a little bit shorter to save on cloth of the period and so on. So I'm going a little bit backwards for the men. Underneath, they would have their shirt. One soldier, now they were authorized, these gray coats. We probably didn't receive them until September of 75. So they were authorized in May of 75. They started raising troops on eastern end of Long Island, 3 companies, about 200 men, 70 men per company on the eastern part of Long Island at Huntington and Smithtown. They were raised or recruited by their captains, and they were promised a uniform, a hat, cartridge box, and musket. They probably did not have them until September, when they left Long Island to march and travel upstate up the Hudson River on an ill-fated expedition towards Canada. We tried making Canada the 14th colony, which unfortunately failed. But anyway, so we believe they eventually had gray coats faced in green. Underneath, they have a linen shirt. One soldier, the soldier with the different hat in the center, has a checked shirt. So they're still wearing civilian clothing. The captain in the blue coat has canvas breeches because Long Island had a very big connection with the sailing and fisherman industry, so canvas was readily available. So his are made out of canvas. So we have natural colored breeches, we have some wool breeches, and so on. But the breeches are the garment that most civilian men wore during the period. When you come to camp, we have a couple of men in trousers. Trousers were basically long garments, just like pants today, but they were more for sailors or working class and so on. But the typical costume or garment were the breeches. And then they all have waistcoats. Some of the waistcoats may be different because they're wearing what they wore from home. We have evidence that the 3rd New York was issued coats, but we don't believe they were issued what we call small clothes, the waistcoat and the breeches. The men have stockings made out of linen or wool. One soldier in the center, Lee, if you step up, this is a British style. He has his stockings covered by gaiters. These are full gaiters. There's like, what, Liam, like 24 to 30 buttons?
Buttons are made of, buttons on the side here, they're made of bone. Some people, when they look at these, they think it's all black. It's a boot. It is not a boot.
Yeah, I believe you said the buttons are made out of bone, and his particular gaiters, I believe, are wool. They were also made out of painted canvas, and they protect his legs, you know, when marching through underbrush and other things as well. But you know, again, he may have had them from his father, who was in the French and Indian War, brought them home, and he's still using them, and so on and so forth. He also has a slightly different hat. He's got what they call a round hat, and he cocked it up on one side to be stylish. Whereas most of the soldiers are wearing military cocked hats, which was the style that the British, Hessians, and European armies wore. And this was the most common military style hat of the period. Before I ask them to turn, we have one soldier, as well as myself, who are musicians. We have our drummer boy, Captain, has the same uniform as everybody else, except he has lace on his sleeves to denote that he's a musician. I'm a fifer. I have white lace. These are actually two different interpretations. We're not exactly sure what kind of lace they got, but we're distinguishing the drummer and fifer by having the lace on the chevrons on our sleeves and so on. In most American and British armies, they actually reverse the color of the coat, and I'll talk about that in a moment. If I could have the soldiers do an about face.
Well, thanks.
So if you look on the equipment they're carrying with them, so they're ready for the march. So all the soldiers, the drummer carries his drum, of course, but the other soldiers have either a metal canteen made out of tin, or I believe one of our soldiers has a wooden canteen that he brought from home. They have black leather pouches on their hips which carry their ammunition. Ammunition was pre-measured so that they had the right. A cartridge had black powder, a musket ball, and paper, so it was ready to load into the musket. They didn't use hunting horns or that sort of thing to measure out. Infantry regiments used cartridge boxes and had anywhere from 19 or 18 to 36 cartridges in their pouches. Many of them have linen haversacks, which they would carry their foodstuffs and their personal items on. And I think a couple soldiers have packs, right? Anyone carrying a blanket? Yeah, we have one with a blanket, so he's ready for the march. So they would carry their other personal, if they had them, they'd have an extra shirt, extra pair of soles for their shoes, extra breeches, and so on. As the war went on, they had fewer and fewer of these things, as you can imagine. Okay, we're going to do another right about face.
Right.
They also have muskets that are patterned after British muskets. British had a musket called the Brown Bess. Musket has, I believe, a 42-inch barrel. They are smooth bore. Most soldiers did not have rifles during the period. A rifle has a rifle bore, which is grooves cut inside the rifle. They had this technology during the 18th century, but 90% of the infantry all the infantry regiments did not have it. Only specialized rifle corps, like the Virginia rifles, the Pennsylvania rifles, as well as the British later had a group called Ferguson's Rifles, and the Hessians, the Germans, Jaegers had rifles as well. But generally, infantry tactics with smoothbore, and the Captain, will you just bring them to present, to show them how to present not to present, to fire the muskets, dry fire?
Shoulder, firelock. Have a care, dry fire. Prime and load.
So what they would do, and we're going to demonstrate this later, they take the cartridge out of the box, bite off the top of it, pour the powder into their pan for the priming charge, shut the pan, cast about, load the musket. They would ram down the musket. We're skipping the ramming down for safety reasons. They'd ram down the cartridge, and now they're ready to fire. And a well-trained soldier can fire 3 to 4 shots in a minute.
Have
So
a care.
different than today.
Make ready. Present. Fire.
And notice the drummer gave a signal
Shoulder,
as they're
fire.
preparing to fire.
Gary,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Be in front of that. We have a lost girl.
The real world has to, take priority. Sorry. No problem. All right. So anyway, they would fire in volleys. The Americans did not fight behind trees. They did not really aim. They pointed in the direction of their enemy, and they shot in volleys on command. We'll demonstrate that around 2 o'clock or 2:15, right after this presentation. Lastly, I want to talk about our one soldier who's in blue coat. Blue coats did exist during this time, but the Continental Army was, every colony outfitted their soldiers as they could. And in 1775, New York had blue coats with red, just like this soldier. They had gray coats, they had brown coats. Massachusetts had brown coats, Pennsylvania, New Jersey had gray coats. Actually, they were undyed coats. So very, very ununiform. But our captain is kind of dressed. The 3rd New York served from 1775 to the beginning of 76. January 76, their enlistments were up, and they returned home. Many of them re-enlisted in the 2nd New York Regiment and later. But our captain is dressed in the uniform that the 3rd New York wore in 1777 and later. So eventually they did have blue coats faced in red. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to conclude our demonstration. If anyone has any questions, I'll stick around for a couple minutes. But we're going to move over back to camp, outside our camp, where we have our cannon. And if anybody wants to see a demonstration of firing of the cannon and of the musketry, join us over there, and we'll probably play some music as well. Thank you very much.
Elfish, have a care. By the right. Face. Front. On.
So I guess one thing maybe you can gain from this is that this was a volunteer army with very little support, and they basically, it's amazing how they got the funds to support the soldiers. But as you know, the American cause was very challenged, both with supplies, uniforms, food, and things of that nature. And one little sort of footnote that I want to give credit is the French really saved America by eventually secretly supplying clothing and black powder, ammunition, muskets, and so on. And then eventually in 1778, the French alliance was signed, and then France Navy and Army joined us as in our fight for independence. Anyone have any questions? All right, great. Well, you've been a great audience. I hope you enjoyed it.